Hello Year 10, welcome to this week's episode of your English Literature podcast. And we're talking to you today about the poem Before You Were Mine by Carol Ann Duffy. With you today you have Miss Beaumont,
Mr. Rafi,
and Mrs. Sajid.
So make sure please that you have read the poem first and that you have it in front of you. So if you need to, take a minute now to pause this podcast and go and get the poem and read through it. Please make sure that you do that now. Otherwise, we'll get started today by talking a little bit about what we think this poem is about, so an overall summary. You'd like to start us off?
So you've got the speaker here talking about how her mother was like when she was younger. As she goes through, she just describes what her mother actually was doing when she was younger, how she used to dress, and you get like a sense of maybe a regret that she wants to be with her mom maybe there. She doesn't like the way she is right now. So that's what my summary would be like for this poem.
Definitely. Mum's quite glamorous, isn't she? She's described when she's younger as being this very glamorous, almost quite a rebellious character. So somebody who would go out late at night, somebody who would dress up to the nines and would be wearing these amazing, incredible, glamorous clothes and going to all of these glamorous places and meeting lots of different people and even engaging in different romantic relationships as a youth as well.
And I think since she's been born, I think she's taken away all of that from her mother. Her mother doesn't feel like she can do all that now. And I don't think it tells you like exactly what it was, but motherhood itself may change the mother, and that's why the speaker here feels like she's done something that she should have probably have, her being born.
Definitely. It's probably a good point now to talk a little bit about the context of the poem and about the poet herself. So Carol Ann Duffy is the poet who wrote this poem, and she herself is Scottish, and you'll know from reading through the poem that there's quite a lot of references to Scotland. So there's quite a good chance that this is an autobiographical poem. She's a feminist as well, Carol Ann Duffy, so she often explores in her poetry these ideas or these expectations around different roles of women. So the ideas about motherhood, perhaps, and about whether traditional roles should be maintained. So that's definitely something to bear in mind as we're reading through this poem, is a lot of the poet's own experiences and own beliefs might be reflected in what you see. Thinking about the language then, what sorts of things have we picked up on in terms of the different techniques that the writers use to tell this story?
So if you go through it, there is quite a bit of glamorous imagery. So if you look at the second stanza, it talks about in the ballroom with 1,000 eyes, the busy, the movies tomorrow. It gives the language itself, makes you can visualize that it's all kind of Hollywood glam, that there's always like, she's always at a party and it's always quite brightly lit and she's enjoying her time. So she's always out there, she's quite outdoorsy and stuff. So you get that kind of imagery in that second stanza, and it actually continues towards the final stanza where she's talking about the stamping stars and then the glamorous love that lasts, where you sparkle and waltz and laugh before you were mine. Even that, the idea, the imagery there, just makes you think that she was living her life before her daughter was born.
Definitely. There's a real semantic field of sort of old style Hollywood in this poem, I think. You've got references to the fizzy movie Tomorrows. So thinking about that fizzy, that image of perhaps champagne, a very glamorous lifestyle, obviously the reference to movies as well. And Miss Sajid, you just mentioned stamping stars from the wrong pavement in the final stanza. That makes me immediately think of Hollywood in America, and the streets have literal stars on them where the movie stars who have been acclaimed as incredible actors and actresses and really influential individuals have their name in a literal star on the pavement. So we've got almost a literal meaning of stars, but also a metaphorical meaning as well, of being someone to look up to, someone who shines.
And you can imagine that as well. You can picture her standing and going to these parties, and because she's maybe so beautiful and she dresses up and everything, you can see that everyone's looking at her and admiring her. And I think for the speaker to see images or even like think back to her mother being like that, it makes her feel a bit of guilt maybe that her mother's not like that anymore. She's taken all of that happiness from her.
Definitely. And one word I'd really like to draw your attention to is that word Marilyn, or that name Marilyn at the end of the first stanza. And I think that's such an interesting word choice because it's an example of holophrasis where one word can have multiple different meanings. So, a bit of context for you. Marilyn was actually the name of Carol Ann Duffy's mum. So, she could be referring to obviously her own mother there by calling her Marilyn. But it's also a reference to a very famous movie star called Marilyn Monroe, who was famous in the earlier part of the 20th century. And she was this incredibly glamorous woman who has a very famous photo in which she stood over a grate in New York and it's blowing up air in her legs and she's holding her skirt down in quite a provocative way, really. She was known as a very attractive woman and someone who, like Carol Ann Duffy's mum in this poem, was also quite rebellious as well, was known for having affairs with lots of very successful men. So not only could Marilyn be a reference to her mum, it could be a reference to this film star. And additionally, in Scotland as well, if you're a girl who goes out and has romantic encounters with lots of different men, you would also be called a Marilyn as well. It's a Scottish word that implies that you're a girl who perhaps it plays a little bit fast and loose with romance, shall we say. So lots that you could talk about just by this one word there.
Also, at that point, guys, if you want to, I would suggest for you guys to go and research a bit more about Marilyn Monroe, so you have a better understanding of what her life was like, and maybe get a better understanding of why the poet has referred to her here.
Definitely, because there's certainly lots of individual notions in here that could link to Monroe and her life. Thinking a bit more about the structure of the poem, is there anything else that we could sort of comment on to build up on this idea of Hollywoods and glamour that we've already touched upon in the language?
I think you mentioned it earlier with the semantic field. So it's not just like in one stanza you're seeing that she's mentioning the Hollywood life, the glamour and things like that. You can see it throughout, because obviously you've got polka dot and Marilyn was known for Hollywood. And in the second stanza again, you've got the born with 1,000 eyes, the busy. The third one, the high heel red shoes. You know, when you're wearing your red heels, it's to look glam, it's to look beautiful. And again, dancing around the waltz, sparkling on waltz and laugh. So there is a semantic of running through this whole thing. And again, like I mentioned, I think earlier, you can see that her mother's life was again quite outgoing. It was a great life for her, and I think her being born has just removed it.
I think it's a structural feature I think is really interesting is the use of questioning in this poem, especially if you look at the third stanza. There's two almost rhetorical questions, but they are definitely addressed to the speaker's mother. So my loud possessive wheel was the best one, A, and whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart. Why do we think the poets maybe included those? What do they sort of add to the poems in terms of the tone, perhaps? Or
it comes across a little bit cheeky, doesn't it, to ask your mum such sort of personal questions about her past? Maybe trying to insult her or trying to get some sort of trying to provoke her a little bit. Maybe she's not happy with her mother. Maybe she's thinking back to how her mum was like, and now she's perhaps trying to live her life the way her mum used to, and now she's been told off for it, or something along the lines of that. So it feels like she's calling her mum out here.
Yeah, like as if she's holding something against her. But then you can also look at it as in the way that maybe she's actually saying to her mum, "Hang on, you enjoyed yourself then. So why did you change now? Why did you have to be the way you are right now?" And again, it can be a negative because her mum may not be as great to her, but she's questioning it, and the tone isn't as it's in a way it's quite sarcastic. I think when she says "small bites on your neck," it's she's trying to maybe call her out and embarrass her.
Yeah, because we get in the second stanza, she says to her mum, "Oh, your ma used to stand at the close with a hiding for the late one," or in other words, a hiding means her mum used to give her a bit of a smack, so hit her when she got home, and she's almost seems to be implying there, I think, that hey, you're strict like your mum was to you now, and I'm the rebellious one, and you haven't learned that lesson that sometimes when you're young you have to go out there and you have to live this glamorous life, and yeah, I think there's a bit of resentment there.
Yeah, because if, at the end of that second stanza she says, "You reckon it's worth it?" So clearly she's saying to her mum, you were able to do it and you enjoyed it and you tried your best to get away with it because you know then you weren't going to be happy. So why can't I maybe?
Yeah, I think so. Although I think the tone does change a little bit by the end of the last stanza when she's talking about cha cha cha, you teach me the steps on the way home from mass. I think she seems quite fond of that memory of her mum walking her home from mass, which is something that you do in church every Sunday. It's a religious ceremony, and teaching her these steps that her mum did when she was young. And I definitely get the sense that the tone there is much kinder towards her mum and much more. Just it's just a much fonder memory for
positive
her.
memory. So if you can maybe even connect to the previous stanza where it says high-heeled red shoes that are relics. Relics obviously meaning that they're ancient and she's not using them. So maybe at that point when her mum was obviously dancing with her, she felt like, okay, she's a part of that glamorous, amazing life where her mum was fully happy.
Definitely, and as well as that, relics, they are something that you don't use anymore, but they're also very important and very sacred objects as well. It's almost got a bit of a religious significance to it, that word, and we can see that there's a little bit of religious imagery within this poem with the reference to mass. So it's almost like these shoes are a symbol of her life, her glamorous life that she's lost so far.
And that relics and the life that she lost links very closely to the word ghost. Your ghost clatters towards me. So the ghost could be a symbolic death of a previous life or previous personality and the way she used to be, which she isn't anymore. So maybe the speaker here is trying to question as to why, Mum, why aren't you the way you used to be? What happened? Was it me? And perhaps a bit of guilt because of the reason of, is she the reason that her mum stopped being the way she was or stopped being as happy as she used to be?
Yeah, I think so interesting in this poem as well is that there's no reference to a male influence at all. There's no reference to a father figure, and it does make you wonder if this is, potentially a relationship that there isn't a male figure in their life. I think really important as well to think back to how Carol Ann Duffy herself is a feminist. So giving a feminist reading of this poem, perhaps are there some criticisms in here that you could make about, what a patriarchal society expects of mothers, and has her mother changed because of the expectations that our society places on mothers to be less adventurous, to be less outgoing and glamorous? Or alternatively, is that just something that naturally happens to you as you get older? So there's a bit of a dichotomy there and a dilemma to be explored. Are there any other critics that we might be able to link to this poem if we were aiming for those extra marks for context and personal interpretations?
If we look at Plato's Ladder of Love, we've easily got Storge, which is just a family love, but we've also got mania love, which is a bit more obsessive, and we can see that the speaker and the daughter here does seem a little bit obsessed with the previous life of her mum, and she's finding it difficult to sort of just move on with her own life. She's trying to sort of dig up everything that her mum used to be like, maybe to use it in her own favour. So she seems quite obsessed.
And I would add on to that maybe if you look at it from the speaker's point of view, a Freudian critical thinker would say that she's actually behaving like she's part of the id, where she's being very selfish. It's all about her. She wants to know about her mom, and when she says the possessive yell, it shows that it belongs to her. So she doesn't want to share. And if you look at it from the mother, you could maybe say that she's part of the ego because she leaves her past and the way she was and the focus on herself to look after her daughter. So both are quite different to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are three really good and really valid explorations that we could make. So in terms of poems that we could link this to then, there are loads, aren't there? Of course, all the poems that explore parental relationships with children. So Follower, for example, we read really recently, explores how relationships with your parents change over time, which is obviously a theme that's explored in this poem as well. It's how her mother has changed over time and how her priorities have changed. So that's definitely something that you could link quite strongly. Any other ideas for poems that we might want to link with this one?
I would say that there's a link to Letters from Yorkshire, because in this you can see there's a bit of resentment between the two, as if one thinks they're better, or one one wants someone other to be a part of their life. And Letters from Yorkshire is quite similar because you've got two people in that poem who are talking to each other, and they're making at points they're making this, but you can still see they care about each other. So one thinks that they're better, their life is better, whereas the others questioning and thinking, why is this? But at the end, you can still see that they're still talking to each other, still sending messages to one another. And just like this one, you've got the mother and the daughter, and the daughter talking about her mother and how things haven't been so great, or how she wants her to change. But at the end, you can still see there's a bit of warmth, how she misses her, especially with that cha cha cha. You can see that she's got some fond memories of her mum as well.
Yeah, is that linking to kind of the idea of distance that we've been exploring in our recent assessment? The physical distance in Letters from Yorkshire is kind of mirrored in that distance caused by time almost between past and present in this poem. Mr. Rafi, anything that you would suggest?
Yeah, just following on from your point of the changing relationships between the parent and the child from follower and For Your Mind, the poem we looked at last week, which was Mother Any Distance, we can see that coming very clearly through how the boundaries change as you get older, as your relationship sort of changes when you need to move on with your own life. So Mother Any Distance is a very good one, as is Walking Away, thinking about a memory of letting go or your child moving on with their life. But this is a bit of a role reversal, because this is about the child looking at how the mother used to be. So it's slightly different, but it has a lot of the same themes and ideas coming across.
Yeah, same with Eden Rock, to be honest, because in Eden Rock, you've got the speaker wanted to cross and be with his parents, even though they've passed, as it's inferred. And in this poem, again, she wants to be with her mother when she was younger, when she was living her life, when things were a lot happier, in a sense. So again, you got that little link where they want to be with their parents in the prime times.
Definitely. Well, I think that's probably all we've got time for this week, but thank you very much for joining us, Year 10, and join us next week when we'll be looking at our next poem. Bye-bye!
Bye.
Bye.